right, hey, let's jump into this right here. So we're continuing on this journey through what has become my favorite book in the Bible, Daniel. So much suspense and intrigue. It's just interesting to me. And every time I go through, it's our second go around, I learn so much about it. And tonight we're on session 5, chapter 5, where we're talking about the night Babylon fell. It is one of the most important or significant events historically. People have wrote about this. Every culture has written about this. It's this famous night. If you in college, if they made you go to world history class, you had to study about this. And this is one of the nights. But it's not also. It's actually, by the way, a single event. It's one night. We know the date of it. It's October 12th, 529 BC. This is the night that Babylon fell. But it's not just one of the most historical events. It's also one of the most important biblical events because your Bible typically focuses on Israel as the plan. And we know the story of Israel, right? They're God's chosen people, and they sinned against God. He put them in timeout, captivity for 70 years, and then he's going to take them and let them go back into his land. This is the night it happens. The Jews return to the land on October 12th, 520. This is the catalyst work. But it's not just one of the most significant biblical and historical, also prophetical, because Babylon was the first city, the first world empire, and it is promised to make a return visit again in the future. And right now in the deserts of Iraq, they're starting to excavate and rebuild some of that. And there's some work with the United Nations in restoring Babylon. So Babylon will return. That's predicted. So you've got some historical, biblical, and prophetical aspects to it. And we're going to jump into that tonight. When we left off, last lesson, this guy here, Nebuchadnezzar, had God said, humble yourself. If not, you're going to have 7 years of insanity. Didn't listen. He went through 7 years of insanity. Daniel nursed him back to health. And then he wrote a public testimony to the world. He wrote about, I called it the gospel according to Nebuchadnezzar because it reads as the gospel. It sounds like a personal testimony to somebody who becomes a believer. I fully expect to see this guy in heaven. And I'm going to look for him when I get there. Where's he at? And he may not be there, but it sure sounds like it. The more you read it, the more it sounds like that. But he wrote this when he came out. It says when he humbled himself to God, his mind restored. And he got his kingdom back and his mind back. And he wrote it that year and sent it out. Now, if he lived in 2021, he would have typed this up, put out an email blast, tweeted it, and posted on social media, right? At the time, he wrote it out, made copies, and sent it on horseback throughout the empire. But chapter 4, most people don't realize, is written by a pagan king, a non-believer at that time, and sent out to the world. That's where we left off. What happened after that? Well, he dies about a year later. And it passes on to his son and his son-in-law and on and on and on. There's a whole line of kings. There's assassination attempts and a whole bunch of stuff. But 25 years has passed. And so now, where has been Daniel through this? I want to give you a perspective of Daniel. Here's his Babylonian captivity, right? Here's what we know about this. Nebuchadnezzar, that guy, attacked Jerusalem in 597. And he didn't kill everybody. He didn't burn the city down. He didn't destroy the temple. He just took all the good stuff out of it. He took the gold and the silver and all of Solomon's gold mines. He raided that. He took the utensils out of the temple. And he took some of the royal kids, Daniel and 3 of his buddies. And he takes them hostage and takes them back to Babylon. Left everything intact. And if you study that, he inevitably burns the city to the ground. That's 597 BC. Daniel is 14. So what was he born? Maybe 611. Okay, this event tonight, it's 529. Daniel is not a 14-year-old anymore. It's been 68 years. He's now an 82-year-old man. And he's seen 68 years of it. But here's what's been going on. We haven't got there yet, but Daniel, some things have been happening in this 25 years. You'll learn about when you get to chapter 8 and chapter 9 that there's been some prophecies and visions that's come his way. And he hasn't just been asleep for a whole quarter of a century. But keep in mind, there's 12 chapters that make up Daniel. And the first 6 are historical. The last 6 are visions of prophecies that he'll receive. So all during this time, Daniel has been studying his Bible, right? Because things are happening in his world and he's being very diligent. He's not just studying it. He's reading through everything and watching the events around it. And it's fascinating to me. You'll get there when we get to like chapter 8. It is so fascinating to see somebody in the Bible, read the Bible. I don't know why it impresses me so much, but someone in the Bible is actually reading the Bible. And you know what you take away from that? They always take it literally. They never read it and say, well, this is what it says, but here's what this means. No, they take it literally. God says what he means and means what he says. And Daniel's going to do that. What has he been reading? He's been reading in particular the book of Jeremiah and the book of Isaiah. And here's what he's reading during this time. It says in Jeremiah, it explains that the Jews, him, are going to be in captivity for 70 years. And Daniel doesn't think it's about 70, maybe 60 or 80, no, 70 years. He believes it's 70 years. And in Isaiah, it tells him that somebody by the name of Cyrus is going to defeat the country he's in and send all the Jews back home. So he's reading these scriptures, and you'll see this later on when we get down the road. But he's like, wow, okay, we're going to be in captivity for 70 years, and we've been here 68. So something in the next 2 years is going to send us back to Israel. And somebody by the name of Cyrus, I don't know who that is, but he's going to defeat Babylon. And we're in the most powerful empire on the planet. And somebody named Cyrus is going to defeat them. So he's watching the events, right? And he's waiting for it. Here's what those things said. This is what Jeremiah says. And he will actually read this. This is what he will read coming down the road. This entire land will become a desolate. This is God talking to Israel, by the way. He's talking to Jeremiah. This entire land will become a desolate wasteland. Israel and her neighboring lands will serve the king of Babylon for 70 years. Then after the 70 years of captivity are over, I will punish the king of Babylon, the guy that he's going to deal with tonight, and his people for their sins, says the Lord. So he's studying that. Okay, here's what Isaiah says. Isaiah, and this is hundreds of years before Daniel's time here, or at least 150. And God is talking to Isaiah. And he says, I want you to write a letter to Cyrus. Cyrus doesn't even exist. There is no Cyrus. But God's going to tell him this right here. Write this down. Thus says the Lord to Cyrus, his anointed. So whoever Cyrus is, God has anointed him. Interesting. Whom I have taken by the right hand to subdue nations before him and to loose the loins of kings. I want you to make a little mental note or physical note of that phrase, because that's going to happen in a crazy way. Their fortress gates will be open, never to shut again. So he's going to anoint this guy Cyrus, whoever this is, and he's going to defeat all the countries, conquer the world, because God wants him to. This is what the Lord says. I will go before you, Cyrus, and level the mountains. I will smash down gates of bronze and cut through bars of iron. And it's interesting that tonight, when Babylon gets taken over, the Persian Empire will come through gates of bronze and iron bars, just like God predicted. And I will give you treasures hidden in the darkness, secret riches. By the way, when Nebuchadnezzar raided Solomon's mines, he went back and hid all the gold. It's supposed to be the largest supply of gold ever. And he hid it in Babylon that no one could find. But somehow Cyrus will just stumble upon it magically. I will do this so you may know that I am the Lord, the God of Israel, the one who calls you by name. Here's the key to this. Verse 4. And why have I called you for this work? Why did I call you by name when you did not even know me? It is for the sake of Jacob, my servant, Israel, my chosen one. And it goes on. So this is a letter God tells Isaiah to write 150 years before this guy Cyrus is born. Interesting. And Daniel is reading it. Never met Cyrus. Don't know who he is, but he knows what the Bible says. So here's Daniel. He's in this incredible city, largest city on the planet at the time, probably. And it's a fortress, and we'll talk about that in a second, but it's about to fall on this date. So let's get a little perspective here. This is, let me go back here a minute. Let's play a hypothetical. We talk about this captivity stuff, right? Israel's going in captivity. Sounds like a bad thing. They've been punished for their sins, right? Here's a different look at it. Let's say that you have military or police intel, and you know for a fact, 100% fact, that a house down the street is going to get bombed. You know it is. You don't know the people, but it's about to be bombed. So you rush over to their house because the report says in the next 10 minutes, the house is getting bombed. And you want to go let those people know. So you rush up in there and you're banging on the door, and you come in, you're like, it's a man and a woman sitting there, feet kicked up, watching Netflix, eating chips and salsa. And hey, guys, I know you don't know me. This house is getting bombed in 5 minutes. Get out right now. Trust me. And they look at you like you're an idiot, right? Like, who are you? Why are you in our house? I get it. I get it. You don't know me. Trust me. Get your stuff. Get out of here, because in 3 minutes, it's going to get bombed. And they say, if you don't get out of here, we're going to call the police. And you're like, I can't get these people to understand. They're about to die. And you look down on the floor, and here's 2 little toddlers playing. And they're going to get killed. And you got a moral dilemma. It's not your kids, but you know what's about to happen in 2 minutes. And you say, listen, I know you don't know me. Trust me, take your kids, get out of here. This house is going to get bombed. And they look at you and just laugh. So you know what you do? You whisk those 2 little babies up and you rush out the door right as the house gets bombed, right? Or you let them die. But you probably saved the babies, right? Probably did. Now, we think about this captivity as a bad thing. And yet, I want you to read this story that God also tells Jeremiah about the good figs and the bad figs. Because in that story, you kidnap those babies, but you save their life, right? Here's what God says to Jeremiah. After King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon exiled Jehoiachin, son of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, to Babylon, along with officials of Judah and all the craftsmen and artisans, the Lord gave me this vision. I saw 2 baskets of figs placed in from of the Lord's temple in Jerusalem. One basket was filled with fresh, ripe figs, while the other was filled with bad figs that were too rotten to eat. Then the Lord said to me, what do you see, Jeremiah? I replied, figs, some very good and some very bad, too rotten to eat. Then the Lord gave me this message. This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. The good figs represent the exiles I sent from Judah to the land of the Babylonians. Not I punished them, not I was angry at them, I sent them. If you remember, Daniel was unharmed. He was taken captive and taken over to Babylon and lived a great life. The people left behind didn't live so much of a great life. I will watch over and care for them, and I will bring them back here again. I will build them up and not tear them down. I will plant them and not uproot them. I will give them hearts that recognize me as the Lord. They will be my people, and I will be their God, for they will return to me wholeheartedly, and they will. And they did. And a lot of the Old Testament was written during that Babylonian captivity time, and the people worshiped God. But the bad figs, the Lord said, represent King Zedekiah of Judah, his officials, and all the people left in Jerusalem. And those who lived in Egypt, I will treat them like bad figs, too rotten to eat. I will make them an object of horror and a symbol of evil to every nation on earth. They will be disgraced and mocked and taunted and cursed wherever I scatter them. And I will send war and famine and disease until they have vanished from the land of Israel, which I gave them and their ancestors. You know, Nebuchadnezzar came over 3 times. First time, took Daniel and his 3 buddies. Second time, he came and took 10,000 captives plus Ezekiel. The third time, he came in and slaughtered everybody and burned it to the ground. The good figs were taken out. Now, I can't foresee us, foreign soldiers marching on American soil and us being taken to a foreign country. But if it was to happen, or in some other situation, sometimes God will take you out of something because he loves you. And I have to remind myself of that. And that's kind of what has happened to these captives. Okay, here's Babylon, by the way. All right, so this city's about to fall. How does it fall? It's got this city running through it, and it's very much like, I mentioned it's 15 square miles. All right, so it's basically North Little Rock to Little Rock. It's probably about 15 miles from here to JFK. So imagine Central Arkansas with a river running through it. Imagine that, we do. But imagine that they had taken the Arkansas River and built canals all the way around the city. So you have a river, but you've got a canal system that goes all around it. It looks a little bit something like this. And the whole scene tonight is going to take place. You see where the royal palace is. You've got the Ishtar gates there where people will, that's become a part, that in Tamanki, by the way, is a pyramid. They have found all these writings back during when they went and, this was a scene, by the way, when they, during the Iraq War, of all the stuff. But you can see the river runs through it and this procession away. So how do these people get into it? So you've got a river that runs around the city, plus you have a wall. Now, if you were trying to get across the Arkansas River, you'd need a boat. But what if you got across on a boat, but you're surrounded by a wall that is 350 feet high? So this is the canal system that went all through it. So they had a river, and then they built a canal system throughout the whole city. But here's that. But let's say there's a wall 350 feet high. That's the Regions building. That's about 350 feet high. But it's a double wall system. So imagine 2 Regions buildings all the way around North Little Rock and Little Rock with a river around it. Like, how would you get in? Unless you can fly over it, there's no getting through it, right? So this is the problem the people had, and yet they're going to do it tonight. So this all takes place October 12th. Now, before we get into the first verse, let me set the stage. Let's back up about 3 weeks, because here's what's been going on. Cyrus is over here in the east, and he's growing in power, and he's about to take down Babylon. This is the Euphrates River. And so on September 20th, about 3 weeks before, he captures all the towns upstream. On October 10th, he starts to divert the river. So for the next 48 hours, the river is going to start to drop. And it's going to keep dropping, unbeknownst to them, to the point that the soldiers are going to be able to walk across in waist deep water. And then on October 12th, he's going to send his generals in from the south, and they are going to take over the city before anyone realizes. Matter of fact, most people, it was 3 days later before they realized that they were under another country's control. It's crazy, right? All right, here we go. Daniel, verse 1. Belshazzar, the king, held a great feast for 1,000 of his nobles. Not a small party, 1,000 people. And he was drinking wine in the presence of the 1,000. When Belshazzar tasted the wine, he gave orders to bring the gold and silver vessels which Nebuchadnezzar, his father, had taken out of the temple, which was in Jerusalem, so that the king and his nobles, his wives, and his concubines might drink from them. Let's get the scene. And first off, it says nobles, wives, and concubines. Let's put this right. It's a bunch of drunken men with prostitutes and hookers. That's what, and they're all drinking, right? It's bad. It's whatever you guys watch on Netflix. I don't know. But notice what he's getting. What is he getting? He's getting all the temple cups, the vessels from the temple, that if you go back and you, and we'll talk about this guy in a second. If you go back in Leviticus and Exodus, God had these people make these utensils for his tabernacle. This is God's tabernacle. I want you to make this, and I want you to create this. And he blessed certain people. This is God's utensils that were designed for his tabernacle and his temple. And this dude says, go get them out. We're going to party with them. And on top of that, we're going to toast to our demon gods. How do you think God feels about that? Probably doesn't like it too much, right? Belshazzar. So, by the way, this guy is the grandson of Nebuchadnezzar. So it's not a son, it's his grandson. And you can read in Exodus 31, the gold and silver vessels. That's where God blessed these two guys to create all this stuff, right? So not too awesome. By the way, Nebuchadnezzar, his father, in the Aramaic, there's no word for grandfather. So it's just father. So he's actually grandson. Then they brought the gold vessels that had been taken out of the temple, the house of God, which was in Jerusalem. And the kings and his nobles, his wives and his concubines, they drank from them. They drank the wine and praised the gods of gold and silver and bronze and iron and wood and stone and all that stuff. Not very smart. Suddenly, the fingers of a man's hand emerged and began writing opposite the lampstand on the plaster. If you have a lampstand and you're writing on the wall opposite, what does that mean? It's shining onto that, right? It's spotlighting that. And there's a wall of plaster and a hand writes on it. Then the king's face grew pale and his thoughts were alarmed and his hips joints went slack and his knees began knocking together. By the way, in the King James, it says his loins were loosed. And I got this is a hilarious story. There's a guy following him, Chuck Missler. He was in the Navy, by the way. Good old Navy boy. And he always tells a story that apparently back when the Napoleon and England were fighting, there was an admiral named Lord Nelson. And so the story goes that the French sent one of the battleships up to attack them. And one of the guys come in there and says, Lord Nelson, there's a ship out there on the starboard. What do you want us to do? He says, give me my red waistcoat coat and sound the battle alarms. Okay, they did it. Well, they defeated them. A couple of days later, there's two of them out there. Comes in, Lord Nelson. Hey, there's two of them out there. What should we do? Give me my red waistcoat and sound the battle alarms. So a couple of days later goes by, and this guy comes in and says, Lord Nelson, can I ask you a question? He says, why do you always ask for your red waistcoat when we go into battle? He says, well, son, it's a great question. He says, if I take a shot, I don't want them to see that I'm bleeding. It might cause fear, right? So I'll wear the red waistcoat. So a week later, the whole French Navy's out there. They're completely surrounded. And he says, Lord Nelson, the entire armada is out there. What should we do? Sound the battle alarm and give me my brown breeches. So that's the story. This guy, the prediction, it was prophesied that he would loose the loins of kings. And that's exactly what happens with this guy. So I'll let you use your own imagery. When he sees a hand pop out of the midst and writes on the wall, the king's loins were loosed. There you go, okay? So there we go. There it is. And that's kind of a picture of what it is. So he grew pale and alarmed. His hip joints went slack and his knees began knocking. Now, this is one of those situations that emerged, right? How did it emerge? There is a veil. We always say that heaven, like where is heaven? Is it, 4 billion light years away and turn right and that's heaven's gate? Is it that far away? Or is heaven like right there and we can't see it? Like they watched Jesus ascend into heaven. Like they could see him. These were with an eyesight, right? And Jacob's ladder, right? Angels were going up and down. They could see it. It's like right there. So it's not very far away. And apparently we are always right before the throne of God. So it's right there. We just can't quite see it. So this hand slips behind the veil and writes. And I'm sure it's true. The party was over after that. The king called aloud to bring in the conjurers, the Chaldeans, and the diviners. These are his advisors. The king spoke and said to the wise men of Babylon, any man who could read this inscription and explain its interpretation shall be clothed with purple, and I have a cloth of purpose, and I have a necklace of gold around him, and have authority as third ruler in the kingdom. Now, it's in code. They can't read it. It's not in Hebrew, not in Aramaic. They don't understand what it is. Then all the king's wise men came in, but they could not read the inscription or make known its interpretation to the king. Then King Belshazzar was greatly alarmed. His face grew paler, and his nobles were perplexed. They're freaking out. The queen. Now, this is not his. This is actually the queen mother. This is, if you think back to Nebuchadnezzar, he married Queen Amidus. He's the one that made the Hanging Gardens. He built it for her. This is probably her. She's probably about in her early 80s now. She's just a few years older than Daniel. And so she comes in. She entered the banquet hall because of, I'm sure the word's getting out. Something weird has happened down there in the banquet hall. By the way, I failed to mention this, the banquet hall. They excavated it. They found it. It's a big banquet. It's like 150 feet long, 50, 60 feet wide. And Saddam Hussein back in the 90s rebuilt it because remember, he wanted to be the next, Nebuchadnezzar. So she enters the banquet hall. The queen spoke and said, O king, live forever. Do not let your thoughts alarm you or your face be pale. There is a man in your kingdom in whom is a spirit of the holy gods. This is exactly what her former husband, Nebuchadnezzar, said about Daniel. You have a spirit of the holy gods. And in the days of your father, illumination, insight, and wisdom, like the wisdom of the gods were found in him. And King Nebuchadnezzar, your father the king, appointed him chief of the magicians, conjurers, Chaldeans, and diviners. And remember, Nebuchadnezzar was actually his grandfather. This was because an extraordinary spirit, knowledge, and insight, interpretation of dreams, explanation of enigmas, and solving of difficult problems were found in this Daniel, whom the king named Belteshazzar. Don't get confused. This king's name is Belshazzar. Daniel's name was Belteshazzar. Let Daniel now be summoned, and he will declare the interpretation. So she's right about all that. Now, the question is she saying that because she remembers all the things that Daniel did? He's a legend by now. I mean, the things him and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego did, like this has been passed down from generation to generation. This is incredible stuff. So they're probably legendary. So she may just be stating what her husband said. Or could it be that she also became a believer? Does she have the spirit in her also? I think her husband became a believer. Possibly she's there too. So we'll see when we get to heaven. Okay, now Daniel's going to be summoned, right? Remember I told you he's an 82-year-old man. Like most 82-year-old men, they're not out partying late into the night, right? Daniel's home asleep, I'm sure. I'm just going to interpret that. But let's also get perspective. I told you at the beginning, what has he been doing? He's been getting these visions and revelation and some prophecies, but he's been reading the Bible. He knows he's been here 68 years. Sometime in the next 2 years, we're going home, and it's going to be because of Cyrus. Now, maybe he heard rumors of this guy to the east that's growing in power, so maybe he knows about him, but he's putting 2 and 2 together. And sometime in the middle of the night, they wake him up and says, you've got to come down to the banquet hall, and they take him downtown to go to the palace. I have to guess, and it's just me, I visualize him thinking, now tell me again what happened. A hand wrote on the wall and you guys couldn't read it? Yeah. Okay. And I think he's putting this together. I don't think he's surprised at all. I think matter of fact, when he goes in there, he's not surprised. One more point about Daniel. Do you remember back in session 3, we were talking about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? They played the role of Jews. They were Jews. Nebuchadnezzar plays the role of the Antichrist, right? The Antichrist is going to persecute the Jews during this period of time we know as the tribulation. There's not going to be a church. He's going to persecute the Jews. He's going to put them through the fire. Who comes back and rescues them? Jesus Christ and us. But we get to come down. That's his second coming. He comes to rescue the Jews. So that was a prototype. So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego represented the Jews. The fire was the persecution. And Nebuchadnezzar was the one world leader enforcing a one world religion. But do you remember the question we asked? What does Daniel represent? Because Daniel is nowhere to be seen. Daniel is conveniently edited out of the story. He represents the church, right? Like that he was taken out somehow and not part of that, just like the church will be, unless you're a post-tribber. Well, Daniel here, as he represents the church, he's not going to be surprised by this. And when the world goes crazy, neither are you. Why? Because you also have read ahead in the book and you know what's about to happen. So when we see crazy things happen, and it will get crazy, the world's not going to know what to do. They're going to freak out just like these guys did. You're going to be there armed with your scripture and be like, Damascus just got attacked? Well, that's Psalm 83. Oh, that's Isaiah 60. Oh, that's Ezekiel 38. Oh, that's Zechariah 12. You're going to be reading it like a playbook, knowing the events. And that's why the church, us as believers, need to study our scriptures so that we need to know what's happening out there and we're not caught by surprise. Daniel wasn't caught by surprise. Then Daniel was brought before the king. The king spoke and said to Daniel, are you that Daniel who is one of the exiles from Judah, whom my father the king brought from Judah? Remember, he brought him about 70 years earlier. By the way, Daniel served under Nebuchadnezzar and his son-in-law and a few other people, and actually served this guy, Belshazzar, for the first 3 years. But apparently, we're going to learn in chapter 8 that he goes off to Susa in Iran. And he's doing some, they had a big empire. And apparently he was there, and they never actually crossed paths. But he's like an advisor. And you guys know who James Baker is? James Baker? If you don't know, James Baker was the chief of staff for Ronald Reagan in his first term when he started his presidency 40 years ago, right? 1981. He was his chief of staff, his right-hand man, all the way through both presidential terms. And then when George H. Bush took over, he was his chief of staff and then became his secretary of state, right? He was his advisor for all these presidents. And then after Bush's presidency, George H. Bush, he retired from politics. But then this little company in the mid-90s named Enron was growing, and they brought him out of retirement to be their financial advisor. And he came in and says, stop doing that, stop doing that, stop doing that. And they didn't listen to him, and everything that he predicted turned out to be true. And then he went back into retirement. And then in 2000, during the presidential election, when the hanging chads and all that stuff went on, they brought him out of retirement again, and he oversaw the election results. And then he went and retired again. And then in 2004, when George W. Bush was president, they brought him in to advise over the Iraq War. And he keeps getting pulled out of retirement. He's still alive. He's 91 years old. But he's like this advisor that's wise, and people always want to come back and ask him for advice. That's Daniel. He's this wise, he's seen it all. And so I kind of see Daniel in that kind of role. Now, I've heard about you that a spirit of the gods is in you, and that illumination, insight, and extraordinary wisdom have been found in you. Just now, the wise men and the conjurers were brought in that they might read this inscription and make its interpretation known to me, but they could not declare an interpretation of the message. but I personally have heard about you. I'm sure he's heard all the rumors, that you are able to give interpretations and solve difficult problems. Now, if you're able to read the inscription and make his interpretation known to me, you will be clothed with purple and wear a necklace of gold around your neck, and you will have authority as the third ruler of the kingdom. Why not the second? Here's, I don't know if I put this in here. Yeah, let me show this right. This is the Babylonian king's list. Remember, Nebuchadnezzar was a general in his father's army, and Nabopolassar was the king, and then Nebuchadnezzar took over when he died. And then Nebuchadnezzar had these kids, Marduk and his daughter, and all these had their role as king. And then one of his daughters married this man named Nabonidus. Okay? Why am I telling you this? Because for about 2,500 years, people said, historians, that Nabonidus was the last king of Babylon. That when Babylon fell, Nabonidus was king. But the Bible says it was Belshazzar. So clearly, this is once again fake news. The Bible's got it all wrong. They've had it wrong the whole time. And all these predictions that it has, it was probably written after the fact. That's why I told you this was considered a fraud for 2,500 years. But suddenly things are being discovered. And they just discovered over there in recent times that actually Nabonidus was king, but he basically angered the whole country. He led them into severe inflation. Sounds familiar. And inflation rose to 50%. And because he was spending money on his military, and he got ran out of town, and he traveled to Saudi Arabia and stayed there for the rest of his life and appointed his son Belshazzar as kind of a co-king. And they discovered that Belshazzar was actually the king when Babylon fell, just like the Bible said. And it also shows that not only was the Bible right, but that Daniel had to be an eyewitness to the events. And remember, we talked about, they discovered this, the prayer of Nabonidus in the cave of Qumran. So a lot of discoveries. Daniel asks, so he's going to answer him. He's just been made this great offer. Back to the third ruler, Daniel would be, the father would be the king, and then Belshazzar was second, so Daniel would be third in line. Okay. Daniel asks the king, keep your gifts or give them to someone else, but I will tell you what the writing means. Now, he's going to interpret it, but I want you to see Daniel at this point in time, maybe when you're 82, you just don't care. And he really doesn't care what this guy's going to say. He's probably like, hey, punk, let me tell you the truth here, right? Because remember, he had a great relationship with Nebuchadnezzar, right? They had some type of bond. This guy is not like him. This guy's third generation, and he's not like Nebuchadnezzar or his dad. And he's going to give a chance to kind of talk about this. Your Majesty, the Most High God, gave sovereignty, majesty, glory, and honor to your predecessor, Nebuchadnezzar. He made him so great that people of all races and nations and languages trembled before him in fear. He killed those he wanted to kill, and he spared those he wanted to spare. He honored those he wanted to honor, and he disgraced those he wanted to disgrace. But when his heart and mind were puffed up with arrogance, he was brought down from his royal throne and stripped of his glory. He's going to recap all of chapter 4. He was driven away from society. He was given the mind of a wild animal, and he lived among the wild donkeys. He ate grass like a cow, and he was drenched with the dew of heaven until he learned that the Most High God rules over the kingdoms of the world and appoints anyone he desires to rule over them. He's recapping last session. You are his successor, O Belshazzar, and you knew all this. He knows all this. If we had a former president that was out in the back of the White House, crawling on the ground, eating grass for 7 years, it would make news. Everybody would know it, and they would tell it for generations. He knows all this stuff. He also knows what Nebuchadnezzar wrote when he came back out. He wrote chapter 4, and he gave praise to God, that God had humbled him. Belshazzar knows all this stuff. For you have proudly defied the Lord of heaven and have had these cups from his temple brought before you. You and your nobles and your wives and your concubines have been drinking wine from them while praising gods of silver, gold, bronze, iron, wood, and stone, gods that neither see nor hear nor know anything at all. But you have not honored the God who gives you the breath of life. That's an interesting statement, that God gives you the breath of life and could take it away whenever he wants and controls your destiny. So God has sent this hand to write this message. So here we go. This is the message that was written. Many, many tekel Perez, and this is what these words mean. Many means, by the way, the chapter 5 of Daniel, there are so many catchphrases we still talk about today. Your number's up, the handwriting's on the wall, you have been weighed against the scales of balance, and you have been found lacking. All these phrases still kind of survive throughout this. Many means numbered. God has numbered the days of your reign and has brought it to an end. Tekel means weighed. You have been weighed on the balances and have not measured up. Perez means divided. Your kingdom has been divided and given to the Medes and Persians. And there's a little clever little thing about Perez. Perez in Aramaic means Persian. So it means it's divided, but it also means Persia is going to be the one to take it. So here's what it was. Now, why couldn't they read it? All right. This word right here, this is what they think it was. They think it was written vertically and then backwards, and they could not get it. So let me give you an example of this, because this is pretty interesting. If we took our alphabet and we flipped it around, okay, this is encryption, right? So A would equal Z, B would be Y. If you work in the CIA or something like that, they have to send out these encrypted messages. We live in a world where you have to have encrypted passwords. You know, we're all people, internet hacking and all that stuff. So we live in a day where we have to send out encrypted communications. And so this is all. But did you know this was the first recorded in history, not just the Bible, of encrypted messages in history, not just Bible. This is the first one. And so this is kind of what they would do. So A would be Z, B would be Y, that would be the message. And a computer today would crack that. All right. So there's two types of hidden codes in the Bible. All right. And I'll show you here for a reason. One is called Albam. And what they do is they take the alphabet and they wrap it around and they flip it. Okay. Another version is what's called Atbash. And this one, they basically think of A through Z, A through M, but then reverse it and flip it. And so you have these different. Now, the point of all this is they think that's what this was. The handwriting on the wall looked like this, and what it meant was exactly what we said: many, Tekel, Perez, and it also meant that it's a word for Persians. And Daniel knew exactly what it was because God had gifted him with this. Okay, so then at Belshazzar's command, Daniel was dressed in purple robes, a gold chain was hung around his neck, and he was proclaimed the third highest ruler in the kingdom. That very night, Belshazzar the Babylonian was killed. So Daniel become third in line, and he's probably like, well, gee, thanks, but you know, you've only got 60 minutes left, but thanks for the, okay. And Darius the Mede took over the kingdom at the age of 62. Now, this is where they also have said that, oh, well, obviously Cyrus, it was Darius. The Bible has it wrong. This guy Darius took over for a year, and then he died, and Cyrus took his place. Okay, let's talk about this guy, because this is a pretty cool thing. He was considered one of the history's greatest leaders. So many legendary stories of bravery and leadership. This guy is considered a great man, not just leader, but he's called a great man. Compassionate, wise, all this stuff. So much so, Iran sees him as their definitive leader. They celebrated 1971 on October 12th, 1971. That was the 25th anniversary of that event. They celebrated him. And he established what's called the Medo-Persian Empire, conquered the Medes without a battle. He's going to conquer Babylon without a battle. And he made them a global power for 200 years. So remember, this is what happened. They never actually had a battle. He, September 20th, captured the town, diverted the river, and sent his generals in from the south. Here was the takedown of it. We talked about that. He diverted the river. He sends his troop in from the south, and under the gates, they actually could walk across the Euphrates River. Historians say the water dropped to waist height, and they slipped under the gates without anyone noticing. It would be 3 days before most of the citizens even realized they'd been taken over. No battle. And that's what he would do. Cyrus conquered the Medes in the same way. He studied a culture, studied a city, and found out a way to do it without actually going to war. Smart. But here's this. This is my favorite part. The letter to Cyrus. Remember, we read that in Isaiah that God called him his servant. All right. 9 days later, after that event, Cyrus the Great makes his grand entrance into Babylon. Big time, big celebration. Now remember, the Nabonidus king is down in Saudi Arabia, and Belshazzar's been killed. So probably Daniel is actually the one leading the show right here, right? He is met by Daniel, who presents him with an ancient scroll of Isaiah, which contained a personal letter addressing him by name. You can read Isaiah 44 and 45, and it's the letter that God writes to this guy 150 years before he's born. He presents him with that. What do you think Cyrus's reaction was? That this letter was an ancient scroll that talked about him and what was going to happen. He was pretty impressed. He frees all the Jews instantly and returns all the temple vessels back to Jerusalem. and gives them money to go back home and rebuild the city and rebuild the temple and free them all. And so Iran sees him as a great leader, but also the Jews remember him. And you can read about that in Second Chronicles, and Ezra all talks about Cyrus sending the Jews back home. There's also this cylinder of Cyrus. He wrote about this. He talked about what he did. Without any battle, he entered the town, sparing any calamity. I returned sacred cities, meaning Jerusalem, on the other side of the Tigris, the sanctuaries of which have been ruins for a long time because it had been destroyed for 70 years, and established for them permanent sanctuaries. I also gathered all the former inhabitants and returned to them their habitation. So that is found in the British Museum. He talks about what he did. When I was in Israel, there's a coin out there. The Jews love Cyrus. They love him because why? Because he was a foreign leader who sent them back to their home. And this is a coin where they see Donald Trump as a modern day Cyrus. They put him on the coin right there. That's Cyrus and Trump, because they see Trump as this foreign leader that came and sent the Jews back home. Because in 2017, what did he do? He moved the capital back to Jerusalem on the 70th anniversary. Notice it says to fulfill 70 years. They were made a nation on May 1947. The United Nations said, okay, you guys are a country again. You're Israel. And on the 70th anniversary, he moved the capital back to Jerusalem. And the Jews, they love it. I just find it crazy because when I was over there in 2019, not everybody liked Trump here in 2019. They don't all like him right now. But in Jerusalem, they love this guy. I was blown away by it. He was running, Netanyahu was running for president again, and he had these posters are everywhere. Everywhere in the city you went, because the Jews looked up. It's a fascinating. I was like, my gosh, if you say his name in Little Rock, Arkansas, people throw rocks at you. But in Jerusalem, they love this guy. But they saw him as Cyrus. Okay, okay. So that is the fall of Babylon. Look, there's more we could take, and because I mentioned Babylon's going to come back, but we need to pause for right now. But what we're going to do next week is we would normally try to take a chapter a week. We're going to do chapter 6 in 2 weeks, because next week we got to talk about Babylon's going to return, and it's something called Mystery Babylon. Is it, and we're talking, it's going to reach a destruction. We read about that in Revelation 17. The question is, when you read these passages, if you didn't get a chance to read it last time, read it now. It's Isaiah 13:14, Jeremiah 50:51, and Revelation 17:18. Read them all. They all talk about this future destruction of Babylon. The question is, what is Mystery Babylon? Some people say that it's actually going to be Babylon, 55 miles south of Baghdad. Right now, there's been rumors, it's just rumors, of United Nations making their capital in Babylon, rebuilding the city. It's just rumors. Is that true? Some people see this as spiritual Babylon. They see it as Rome, the Vatican, which makes my Catholic friends not so happy. Some people see it as America. What is it? Is it the actual city of Babylon that's coming back? Or is it going to be a spiritual version of that? So we're going to get a chance to talk about Babylon, not just the ancient Babylon, but something called Mystery Babylon, because it's going to play a large part in what you and I are seeing today, not just on cable news, but what's really going on behind the scenes. So we're going to take a look at that and ask the question, is this really going to be the final world capital? Babylon, the Babylon city? Is that where the United Nations is going to be hosted as their headquarters? What should we be watching for? As we kind of, I don't know if you guys are Twitter followers, but like when you read your tweets or you read your Facebooks or you read your YouTubes, what should you be watching for? And the answer is in here. So we're going to take a deep dive on that. So